To paraphrase Salt and Pepper, let's talk about sets. The real universe is treated like a set for all intents and purposes, which just means a collection of different things. So an example of a set could be set A contains the numbers 1 through 4, and the elements of that set would be 1, 2, 3, and 4. Set B contains the colors of the American flag. The elements of that set would be red, white, and blue. If reality and the real universe are a set, then what does that set contain? Obviously, it contains physical things like galaxies, star systems, living beings, and so forth. But it also contains mathematics, structures like laws and physics, and some subtle thing that brings everything into existence. Can anyone tell me like what the problem with treating the universe just like a normal set might be?
Maybe just reduction to physicality.
Yeah, exactly. So you're only including physical things. Anything else?
When you say a normal set, do you mean a set that isn't dual self-containing?
Yeah, just a regular set, just a collection of elements.
Well, if it's not self-contained, if it's not bound by CTMU logic, that it can't be part of the reality structure.
Yeah,
It can't.
exactly. It's static. It's not changing at all, which reality does.
When you say reality is changing, I was under the impression that the global teller was invariant and the local teller was variant.
Reality as a whole, as a global entity, is not changing, but that global entity is dynamic, meaning it's constantly in the process of change because you see all these different things changing within reality, within the universe.
Yeah, because change implies terminality, which is a quality of the local aspect.
Yeah, so, and the main problem with treating the universe like a set is that it's not actually composed of anything or any elements, strictly speaking, because an object or element exists as something separate from everything else and is contained wholly within its set, whereas but reality isn't separate from anything. So whatever the term reality describes, it has to apply to every real object, and every real object is contained within it. So reality is a power set, meaning that every set, in order to be real, has to be contained within reality. So it's like the mother of all sets. And so this is what's called in the CTMU a super tautology, is that reality consists of all and only reality. It's logically unbreakable because whichever set you propose, even if it's made of imaginary numbers or concepts, it still has real existence as a collection of elements. Here's the first thing that you should take notes on, is that reality consists of all and only reality. Objects and sets exist in space and time and have, or at least in a conceptual space, whereas reality does not. Reality only exists within itself. It has an intrinsic background. So commit that to your mind. What does reality consist of? Reality, all and only reality. It's hard to think how this can actually apply to how we think about reality. So the question is, does this matter? Is this just fancy pie in the sky math with no application to our real world understanding? And the answer to that is no, is that this is the first and most fundamental axiom of the CTMU, of the cognitive theoretic model of the universe, that to model the real universe and to have a fixed entity to which we can say, this is one thing that we can study analytically. To model the real universe, we have to say reality is self-consistent and self-contained, and nothing outside of reality has any effect on it whatsoever. So to put this in the language of set theory, what contains reality, what is reality an element in, it's still reality. So reality is both the set and its elements because everything is real and it's a self-inclusive predicate. So, but containment here, we're using this kind of loosely because we're not talking about a normal set. It's somewhat different than we would say normally when we say one thing is contained within another, like this milk is contained within my fridge. It's normally when we talk about containment, we speak of a smaller object contained within a bigger object, specifically a composite object known as a set. Whereas when we're talking about reality, there's no external reality. There's no external space or time or anything in which it can exist or have been created. So everything within reality is intrinsic to itself. It's a self-inclusive set. So what can we learn from this? What we learn from this is that reality, by its very nature, is self-creating, self-sustaining, generates space and time, and does this in an eternal and infinite way. Time is not something that can affect reality because time is within reality, not outside of it. Nothing is outside of reality, because to even posit something outside of our reality, if we put that as a circle, you'd have to have an unreal influence acting on reality, which is a logical impossibility. And logic is the structure of truth, which denotes inclusion in reality. So it's not possible for an unreal thing to affect reality. And that's inarguable. So the reality is not just the sum of its parts, but it's much more. It's an interconnected whole. So could any part of reality survive even for a single second, you must ask yourself, if it wasn't real? And the answer is obviously no, because unreal things don't exist. And that's another simple tautology that actually gets you very far in terms of understanding. So no part of reality, no planet, no star, no galaxy, not even the universe as a whole can explain away its own existence. The ultimate reality contains all of these things within itself and therefore gives reality to them and is self-contained and gives reality to itself. It's an identification operator that ascribes existence as to its own existence. It's a closed loop, but that's how reality works. So there are two aspects to reality. It has an internal aspect, which is its laws, its structure, its source, and it has an external aspect, which is physical entities, nebulas, rainbows, human beings. Everything in reality has both this internal aspect, which is its essence and its identity, and an external aspect, its expression, the way that it exists in physical space-time. So your internal aspect is your spirit, whereas your external aspect is your body. So you both feel yourself to have an individual identity and a physical extension within the universe. So those two aspects correspond to an internal self or a intention, and your external self or your expression or extension. So if this were a computer, let's say, the internal aspect would be all of the, complicated programming and software and so forth, whereas the display on your screen, what's actually being presented to you and that which you can interface, is the external aspect. So the CTMU says that these are the same. There's actually no difference between the internal and external aspects of reality, or at least they are self-dual to one another, meaning that they are contained within a larger space and are two elements talking about the same thing. They're each contained within the other. So internal reality equals external reality. This is the CTMU's battle cry against dualism, which seeks to separate mind and matter, or form and appearance, or any number of these things. But within reality, there can't be any such fundamentally unovercomable separation, because otherwise it just wouldn't work. Reality couldn't cohere. And so this also means that reality is deeper than we've been led to expect. The world that we see is just the external appearance of the world, whereas the unseen world of spirit, or the non-terminal domain, is the internal form, the shape the universe takes for itself but doesn't show to anyone. And this is what's actually the deep structure of the world, which isn't visible to us, but is still just as real. The universe hides its true essence, but yet that true essence displays itself and filters itself through the creation of the physical universe, through which we can, if we kind of read between the lines of how reality works, we can see the eternal truth, that internal aspect, which is never changing, beyond the appearance of change and appearance. So the eternal truth and the physical appearance of the universe are self-dual to one another. If there was dualism, that would mean that there is no connection between the eternal truth and the physical appearance. But since there is a connection, it means that reality has something called self-duality. It contains both its eternal truths and its appearance within a single structure. So this idea, which is as spiritually moving as it is theoretically important, is called analytic reality closure, ARC. To make our way through the shifting waters of reality theory, we're going to need an ARC, an ARC, analytic reality closure. It means that because reality is entirely self-contained, we can think of reality as one single object. The CTMU defeats dualism through the ARC, and this will be a recurring theme throughout the course. The CTMU defeats dualism through the ARC, through analytic reality closure. Reality is monic, meaning that it is one identity, and it is holistic, meaning that every element, everything within reality has the same rules, the same eternal truths that underlie and give life to everything in the universe. Every object, take, a stapler, for instance, has both material existence, but it also has a self-distributed form that has no physical extent. Applying to this stapler are the same laws of physics, the same logical rules that apply to everything else in reality. And those logical rules, they're not a physical thing. It's not something you can kick like the stapler, but it's there. It's the logical structure that allows anything to exist at all. And the theoretical description of this eternal truth, the syntax, to use fancy language, and which sounds like a scary word, but it just means the rules. So the CTMU is about the syntax of the eternal truth of reality. So basically, in simple words, that just means what we're asking is, what are the rules of reality? What is the structure of this world we live in? What are the rules? And this is what the CTMU tries to answer. The first rule of reality is the ARC. Reality consists of all and only that which is real. Reality contains all and only that which is real, and that which reality contains and that which reality is are inseparable. Reality is defined on what it contains, and what reality contains could not exist without reality. So there's this dual inclusion. So what does this mean for reality theory? It means that reality is self-defining because there's nothing outside of reality to define it on. So what a paradox. How do we solve this? How do we define reality? That's what the CTMU does. It tells us the rules and structure of a reality that defines itself. And this means that reality is autological. Auto meaning self and logical meaning defining. So reality is self-defining. And how could it be otherwise? What else would define it? So let's posit a magical wizard, let's say, who exists outside of reality, trying to cast a spell to affect reality. He spends day and night like a Ted Cruz filibuster, just cooking up this crazy wild curse, reading Green Eggs and Ham and all these crazy books written by aliens, and he's going to break the ARC. He's going to break analytic reality closure. But analytic reality closure defeats Eduardo, the unreal magician, because reality has a comeback. Bam, spell blocked. That's the problem. Eduardo isn't real. He can't hurt you. Reality is autological. Only real things can describe or affect reality, unfortunately, for our friend. And so this is what Chris Langan puts forward in the CTMU, the metaphysical autology principle, or MAP. Reality is autological. It describes itself. And so this means that nothing outside of reality can affect reality in any way whatsoever, because anything that could affect reality is itself real. And so that means that whatever or whoever creates, sustains, or evolves reality is contained within reality itself. So in addition to being self-descriptive, reality is also, by necessity, self-creating, self-sustaining, and self-evolving. And so the difference between this creative, cool, interesting reality that we live in and some finite set is that reality is dynamic. It's constantly changing, acting, progressing. It's full of energy and new ideas. Sets are static. They don't change. They just hoard elements. They don't do anything. Reality does things. Through its self-representation, it is creating itself and in the process of defining it, and is in the process of defining itself. It is a self-inclusive set because it contains itself. And obviously now we're talking about something way more important than sets. If you never knew what a set was, you could probably die happy. But if you never knew the purpose and structure of reality, I would venture to say that you're missing out on something essential. Reality describes everything, and in so doing, it describes itself. Reality is the all. It is the set of all sets. Any possible collection of real elements is itself reality. And so you don't have to know these terms yet. I still get this confused as well. But reality's containment has two phases. Topological containment means that the elements of reality contain the global identity. And descriptive containment means that reality's global identity consists of these many sub-elements. So the global identity contains all of these different instances, just as the instances contain that global identity, contain that rules and structure, which applies to everything, even the stapler, which we talked about before. So this locks in the self-containment because it's happening in two directions. One, in the process of containing itself topologically, reality also contains itself descriptively. So there's no escape from reality because everything that reality contains is part of reality, meaning that in the process of containing something, that something contains it as well. And so this is actually quite elegant when you think about it, because it means that everything in the world is the expression of one ultimate identity. It dissolves the distinction between unity and difference and affects a holy communion between everything in the world. But seriously, everything is communion, calm meaning together, and union meaning one. So together, in all of the differences of the world and its many colors and shades, everything somehow is unified because we are all expressions of ultimate reality. The sun, the earth, the mailman, the snail, the rock, it doesn't matter how complex or non-complex you think that something is, it is in its own way the fullest expression of that ultimate reality. So uniqueness corresponds to descriptive containment, and unity corresponds to topological containment. Uniqueness is the variegated and many colored instances of the world, and unity is the global identity that binds everything in existence together. In the uniqueness of every single element of reality, it is somehow one. It's one entity. And so this is what's called syndifionesis in the CTMU, which is a big word, but all it means is sameness in difference. It means that in the difference of all of these things in the world, that implies that everything is the expression of one ultimate identity, which is ultimate reality. So reality is not just a larger set, but it is the infinite identity that contains and gives life to everything in the world. And it contains it in the process of containing itself and is contained within it. It is the set of all sets. It's not just a power set in the mathematical sense of self-containment, but it is a powerful set. It is literally all powerful, and it is one. We are it. It is us. So we describe it through our existence, just as I'm describing it right now, and it contains us. So we are in the process of descriptive containment as we are embedded in reality, and then reality is embedded within us by our rules and structure. So like a country and its people, we are the citizens of reality, and reality can't be described with just its internal aspect. That would be like imagine a country with no people. It doesn't make sense. It's undefinable. So reality has to have both of these aspects, and reality and the universe refers to itself. So this is what the metaphysical ontology principle, or MAP, tells us. For reality, the MAP, the map, is the territory. Reality is describing itself. It's in the process of ontology, of self-description, in order to model how it should evolve. It does this through an intrinsic language, of which we will speak later in the course, called SCSPL, a self-configuring, self-processing language, which tells reality how it should evolve, aids in reality's self-definition, etc. All of these things, and this will be justified later on, but just kind of try to appreciate this fact now, are linguistic. How do you describe something? You do it through language. How do you tell something how to evolve? You do it through language. Reality is a language. And so this is what you'll learn later in the course, the principle of linguistic reducibility. Everything is language that draws a map, it draws an MAP, a metaphysical self-description, and uses that map to explore itself. It's self-cognitive too. It thinks about itself. And so try not to get too bogged down in the technical details of the CTMU. You know, that has its utility and will come later. But just think, like, isn't this so cool? Like, people don't really appreciate how beautiful I think that these ideas are. Reality is thinking about itself. It is authoring its own destiny. It has ends, purposes, and goals like us because we are made in the image of that ultimate reality. So everything then operates within this language, syntactic operators who are defined by and then in turn modify the rules of reality from the smallest particle to the largest galaxy, from David to Goliath. Everything is a syntactic operator because it's working within this intrinsic language. Reality is an enormous self-synthesizing linguistic system. And this is what the CTMU has been trying to tell us this whole time. And you'll learn what that means throughout our course. This dynamic, this meta language is the author of space, time, the heavens, earth, and everything within them. It gives life to the world. Everything in space and time is informed by everything else in reality to decide what will happen next. This is the miracle of existence. The universe is one dynamic entity, constantly changing and adapting, but it's one thing. Everything makes sense. There is order and there is reason. So when someone asks, you know, what do you learn from this class? Remember these concepts that we've learned. Self-containment. The real universe contains every one of its elements, just as every element contains reality within it. This means that reality includes itself from within, and thus forms a single self-contained whole. Reality contains that which contains it. Cool. So it's self-contained. Hology. Reality is one single identity that distributes over itself and everything in reality. This means that reality is self-similar, like a fractal. The more you zoom in, the more its structures and rules repeat themselves on smaller and smaller scales, and you may see interesting and beautiful patterns throughout. Global structure becomes local patterns, and local patterns define global structure. Reality is the dynamic unfolding of this single intrinsic identity. And reality theory is just the study of reality's self-description. So the metaphysical ontology principle. Reality provides its own map. Nothing else tells it how to exist or evolve. Reality is not only a theory, but a theorist and a model, a cognitive theoretic model to be precise, but that will emerge later, of course. Mind equals reality. Reality is a mind because it is everywhere recognizing itself and processing information in accordance with its own free evolution. So this is what we mean when we say that reality is a mind. It is a self-processing, self-perceptual system with free will. And this too will have to be more rigorously justified later in our course. For now, suffice to see that perception, seeing, and cognition, thinking, are basic features both of reality and mind, and therefore they share common structure. Reality freely determines its own constraints and laws and adapts on the fly to freely changing internal conditions. It determines its content at the same time that its content determines it and calls on its structure. So this is literal. So its structure. So picture a building, right? What classical philosophers would want to ask is a build, and this is this like false dichotomy between materialism and idealism. It's like, is a building made up of bricks or is it made up of the design for the building? This is a meaningless question, yet people ask this or similar things all the time in philosophy. They'll say reality, the building is only the bricks, reality is only matter. But if reality is made up of it, so it is this question, like, is reality made up of matter, or is it made up of a world of abstract ideas, forms, and designs? The answer, of course, as for the building and as
Hi, yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you. You mentioned at some point that analytic reality closure, you almost equated it to the same thing as the reality principle. And I was wondering if you could expand on that. Are they the same? Are they different expressions of the same thing?
Yeah, so that they're basically two terms for the same thing. Christopher Langan, I believe, first used analytic reality closure in his paper, The Metaformal System, and that specifically refers to this idea that reality's intension, its internal aspect, is the same as reality's external aspect. And so that's just a more logically developed version of the reality principle, which simply says reality contains all and only that which is real. So in containing real things, in containing its external aspect, reality defines its internal aspect. And so these two things are not separate, but are actually quite related. So what analytic reality closure says is that reality's internal aspect and external aspect are self-dual to one another. So they're basically two different ways of saying the same general concepts.
You said a self-inclusive set, but you called it something, and it wasn't a superset, it was some other set. What did you call it?
I believe a power set, which is
Set.
a mathematical term which essentially means a set which a set S has all of its elements. So let's say its elements are the numbers A through D. So that set would have A, B, C, or D. The power set of S is self-inclusive, so that means it has A, B, C, D, and the set itself. So it contains itself, and there are a number of interesting things that arise when you put a set within itself and have it as its own element, like reality is. And it also contains the null set. So when you describe reality as a power set, that means it contains everything within it. It contains its own identity, and it contains its own negation. It contains the null set as well. So everything is contained within the power set, and that allows us to describe reality in a more rigorous way than even just mere self-inclusion.
This is very elegant, and it actually defines itself in logic, which is amazing.
I was thinking it would be interesting to include not just Christopher Langan, but even though he is probably the most important character, but a series of other philosophers who are actually involved in, like, a credit to them, and who actually did do very important work that has led up to the CTMU.
Yeah, so that will probably be in future installments. There's a lot that was actually come up with by a lot of the forerunners to the CTMU. So like a lot of these ideas around self-inclusion are attributable to Bertrand Russell and his ideas around set theory. But these the paradoxes which he kind of put forth about self-inclusion, like the famous one is, if you have a barber who shaves everyone who doesn't shave himself, does he shave himself? Because if he shaves himself, then he doesn't, but if he doesn't, then he has to. And so these kind of linguistic paradoxes and logical paradoxes around self-inclusion, I guess, kind of have a lot of basis in a lot of the earlier thinkers. And Langan credits Bertrand Russell immensely with kind of a lot of the ideas around the CTMU and the idea that reality is logical or linguistic in essence. And there are a number of others who are similar to that. So yeah, I think a lot of the future parts of the course will be a little bit of background about that in some of these older thinkers, that to the extent that's necessary to get to understanding of what we're talking about in terms of syntax and logic and linguistics and that sort of stuff. What are things that are helpful to know for the CTMU? Like you mentioned, set theory. So this course, I think I wouldn't put forth any prerequisites for this course in particular, because I don't really think that you need to know anything going into this, because I'm going to do my best to kind of cover all of the prerequisites in the process of going through all of these topics and try to simplify it as much as possible in a kind of incremental didactic style so that you can really learn and appreciate all of the different parts of that. That said, what are the most important things to learn, I'd say probably one, and this you can also learn after you've completed the CTMU study and you have very rigorous knowledge, is I'd say modern science, because then you can start to think about how do these concepts and these logical concepts correspond to physics and our understanding of the world and its structure. And the physicists have actually gotten a lot farther than modern day current philosophers on this. There's still, even though they're still embedded within a physical framework or physical semi-model of which kind of neglects half of reality, there's still a lot to be learned from physics. And I've written actually 2 papers about how the CTMU kind of interprets quantum theory and relativity and all of these sorts of things. So that's very important to know. I would say systems theory and understanding how cybernetics, and I think this is all kind of contained within how the CTMU does, but this idea that there is a synergy, or that sets and systems are more than the sum of its parts, and understanding conceptually how things cohere. I think a lot of that, a little bit of linguistics, and then a bunch of, I guess, some basic like set theory, category theory. But I don't really think like there's this need to like gatekeep the CTMU. Like I think most of the concepts are pretty self-explanatory. So I wouldn't say there's anything that like you have to know, but there's a bunch that would be helpful to know and would help your learning. And probably also some background in like philosophy. I read last year a history of Western, which was very good and pretty accessible, actually by Bertrand Russell, and he just kind of goes through kind of the whole intellectual tradition of how everyone in the West basically has thought about reality. So I'd add that too. It's very good. And
History of Western philosophy.
a history of Western philosophy by Bertrand Russell.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And also I'd say whatever your personal religious or spiritual practice or religion is, I'd say to study that as well and try to think about what that your preferred scripture is trying to teach you and trying to apply CTMU principles and connect them to ideas that you already resonate with, and then you'll have a deeper understanding that really connects you to that spirituality.
I would just like to say quickly that there is a concept in just on what you were saying about CTMU principles referenced in religious texts. As part of the Hermetic tradition, there's this concept called Ein Sof, which means eternal, I think. Sorry about that. But it also means that it is happening inside itself. That's literally what it means. That's part of the concept of what it means. It means that reality is actually sort of expressing itself internally. And that is a concept which was thought up or meditated on 2,000 3,000 years ago. So
Yeah.
talking about reality as an internally self-defining being, or internally self-selecting, or whatever, it resonates highly with the CTMU.
Yeah, I agree. And this is one of the things I wrote about in my book, is that the idea of Ein Sof comes from the Jewish Kabbalistic metaphysics. And the idea is that there is an internal structure to God. God is not entirely abstract, but the way he filters himself into the world is through these series of emanations, is through is through the Sephirot. And so basically what that's this problem is like we'll say like mind equals reality and God is ultimate reality. So people say that God is like just a mind, and this is how Moses Maimonides he defined, and he's kind of falls into more of the rationalist Jewish metaphysic, is the that God is the knowledge and the knower, and somehow, for us, knowledge, knowing, and being the knower are three different things, but for God this is one. So meaning that in the mind of God, the separate capacity of being a knower, a knowledge, and the capacity by which he comes to know are actually the same. But this is actually not true. This is only at the top of, I'm sure some of you have seen this, like the tree of life with the 10 Sephirot in Kabbalah. And so the top two are Chokmah and Bina, and Chokmah is kind of the inception of all of existence, and Bina is the womb into which that is received. And then which is not actually part of the tree of life, but is another aspect of God, is Da'at, which means knowledge. So there's wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and that corresponds to knowing, the knowledge, the knower, and the known. And so that also resonates with the idea of the CTMU, that the reason for being, the reason for the universe and God's emanation is self-knowledge. But God's ultimate identity is not any of his emanations, but is the infinite source of all of existence. So so all of these different aspects are just the clothing of the Ein Sof, which literally means Ein, which means without, and Sof, which means the end. It's without end. There's no limit. And so basically God is infinite, God is infinity, and then takes on the garments of all of these different things, and then ultimately descends to become a presence in the material creation. So actually the Ein Sof is the ultimate identity of reality, because it's that when you remove all constraints and clothing from how reality expresses itself is its ultimate essence. So the dynamic between those three things, between wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, is the same as God's self-knowledge, because it is how the wisdom, which is kind of the inception point of God's emanation, comes to know itself and define itself.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Tommy, you mentioned you have a book.
No.
Where do we get this book?
I can send you what I have thus far. I have around 130 something pages written, but I can send that to you.
Wow, that's amazing. Yes, thank you.
If anyone else is interested, I can as well.
No, this was amazing. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, this is some pretty cool stuff, bro.
Amazing. Thank you. I hope to see everyone next week. It's an honor and a privilege to get to teach such a focused, intelligent group of people.
Thank you for doing this at 8 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock when you did it last, because that was too early for me. I barely made it for this one, but thank you again.
Yeah, for me too.
Thanks.
Have a great rest of your day to everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Tommy.
Bye bye.
Take it easy.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.